Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with Eliza Chat, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world.
All right, so it's January. New Year energy is everywhere. People are motivated. Calendars feel fresh. Gyms are packed. And there's this sense of, this is the year that I finally get it right. But if we're being honest, most of us also know how this usually goes. By February, and the stats back this, a lot of people give up on those goals, right? The goals are gone. And when that happens, people tend to internalize it really quickly. They either tell themselves, I just didn't have the discipline, or I'm not consistent, or this is just who I am, and accept it. And I used to believe that too. I really thought goal failure was a character flaw. But the more I've reflected on my own patterns and the more we've worked in the mental fitness space, the more I think that story is just off, right? Most people are not failing because they don't care or aren't trying hard enough. They're failing because the way we set goals ignores how humans actually change.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important distinction. Discipline gets blamed for almost everything, but discipline only works when there's enough internal capacity to support it. What I see over and over again is people trying to stack change on top of stress, exhaustion, and poor sleep, and other sort of emotional overload or burnout that people are going through. And they set ambitious goals without really accounting for the state that they're already in. And then when they can't follow through, they assume the problem is willpower. And like you said, they take it personal and you start thinking it's a character flaw. But you can't out-discipline a depleted nervous system. If someone's already running on empty, asking them to wake up earlier or work harder or eat better or be more consistent is basically asking them to ignore the signals their body and mind are sending them. That's not a discipline problem. That's a capacity problem.
No, exactly. And this is where mental fitness really reframes that whole conversation, right? Most goals are focused on external outcomes like, lose weight, be happier, be more productive, get in shape. But very few goals are built on self-awareness, emotional regulation, or an understanding of why certain habits exist in the first place, right? So if you don't understand what's happening internally, you end up fighting yourself. You're kind of like you said, you try to force change without addressing stress patterns, coping behaviors, sleep debt, like you said. And when that doesn't work, the default response is self-criticism that we fall into, right? So mental fitness isn't just about fixing yourself. It's about building the internal foundation that makes change truly possible. That means, strengthening your connection to self, your connection to others, and your health and vitality. When those pillars are solid, the goals start feeling like, constant uphill battles.
Yeah, if you get the internal processes and systems working right, the outcomes will take care of themselves. So in this episode, we want to dig into the science behind why most New Year's resolutions fail, and more importantly, what actually helps people follow through long term. We're going to talk about why micro shifts tend to outperform big, ambitious goals, why awareness often matters more than motivation, and how building capacity changes the way you approach change altogether. If you've ever felt frustrated with yourself for not sticking to goals, or if you've ever wondered why you can be highly capable in some areas of life but stuck in others, this conversation, today's episode, is really for you. So stick around. Let's get into it.
So let's start off, Dave, on why most goals fail, right? And it's really not a motivation problem. Through the research and everything we've looked at, it's really a design problem. And one of the big points is most goals are too vague for the brain, right? And we talked about this a little bit in the intro. Examples like lose weight or just be happier, be more productive. Truly, the brain needs specificity, feedback, and predictability, right? So if you just have vague goals, that can create decision fatigue and friction. And when the brain does not know what to do today, that's when it defaults to these old patterns and habits.
Well, it's impossible to know if you're making progress when it's vague, because it's not
right.
It's not measurable. It's not clear. It's not specific enough to even know really what to do. And so When you feel generally the desire to be happier or lose weight, okay, well then let's think of something that we can make that very specific in a very obtainable way. So that's one of the main reasons why goals fail. When the brain doesn't know what to do today, it just defaults, like you said, to habits and patterns. Another reason is that goals are too ambitious, or there's too many goals. I remember hearing years ago, listening to Kevin Rollins, who was the CEO of Dell Computers at the time. And he was saying, I've heard CEOs talk about their top 10 list. I don't believe in the top 10 list. You can only focus on 2 or 3 things at a time. So he says, scrap the top 10 list, find your 2 or 3 things. And the science backs that. Your brain can't focus on more than just a couple things at a time. So if you make a long list of goals, it's not possible to really be consistently focusing on them. Better, if you have 10 things you really want to accomplish in a year, take 2 or 3 of them, focus on those for the first quarter. Take the next set, focus on those in the next quarter. Make them habits, make them part of you, then move on to the next one. But you're really setting yourself up for failure, or in other words, discouragement, when goals are out of reach, either too ambitious, is just something beyond your capability even closely to accomplish, or when you just list too many different things. And I know we all want to stretch ourselves with goals, so it's not about not stretching ourselves. We definitely need to stretch. But if it's impossible to obtain, or there's just too many different things to focus on, we're really setting ourselves up for failure. Less is more.
No, yeah, that's so true. Less is more in all areas of life, but especially in goals. That's a really solid principle. And then as it relates to mental fitness, a lot of times we set goals that just ignore internal capacity and what we're actually able to achieve, right? Because if you're stressed, if you're already burnt out, if you're having poor sleep, if your emotions are already overloaded, and then you're trying to stack change on top of that exhaustion, that's when you don't understand those underlying things that are truly the issue, the foundations, right? But that's when you blame willpower, or maybe I'm just not a disciplined person, right?
Yeah.
When truly it's your internal capacity, right? You can't out-discipline a depleted nervous system or exhaustion, right?
Yeah, there's the physical analogy. When you're burned out physically, depleted, you can't just say, you know what, to feel better, I'm just going to go run 10 miles. Your body can't physically do it. And it's the same with ourselves, emotionally and mentally. If the core pillars of mental fitness are out of sync, and like you mentioned all the key things with sleep and stuff, but yeah, if those are out of sync, you're going to have limited capacity. So let's address those things. Let's set goals to address those core things, and that'll give us the energy to accomplish the other things that we want to do in our lives. There's another point. So the kind of a fourth point. So we mentioned so far reasons that goals often fail is too vague for the brain, not specific, too ambitious or too many individual goals. And then what we just talked about, goals ignore our internal capacity. Then kind of a fourth reason why goals fail is the focus is on the outcomes and not the causes. So people aim at behavior without understanding why the behavior exists. So habits usually serve a purpose, often emotional or regulatory. If we have a bad habit of doom scrolling, and we say, I'm just gonna set a goal to stop doom scrolling, that's a very great goal. But if doom scrolling has been your coping mechanism for like decompressing from a stressful day at work, you're not just going to white knuckle your way through that if you're focusing on the outcome and not the underlying cause.
Right. No, and this is where, again, mental fitness changes the entire conversation. So let's transition a bit and reframe goals through that lens of mental fitness, right? Because, goals stick when they're built on those right foundations, not forced through resistance or just willpower or discipline alone, right? So you've heard us talk, if you follow this podcast, about the 3 pillars of mental fitness before. At its core, right? Mental fitness is an active process. It's about strengthening your ability to respond to life instead of constantly reacting to it. So when it comes to goals, the question isn't just what you're trying to achieve, right? Outcomes like we just talked about. It's what kind of foundation are you building underneath that goal?
Yeah, that's a good point. And let's quickly walk through how each of the three pillars supports goals that actually stick. So first pillar is connection to self-awareness first. So self-awareness comes before self-control. You see that if anyone who's parented a young child, self-awareness comes before self-control. They got to kind of understand why they're feeling a certain way or want to do certain things. We've talked about connection to self and awareness on a few previous episodes, and even have a recent episode dedicated just to this topic. But I'd suggest that you go listen to those and diving into what that means to connect with self. However, in relation to goal setting and achieving goals, self-awareness is truly foundational. Self-awareness is not the destination, it's the map to the sustainable change.
I mean, I'm sure we could both list some examples, but I think, a big one you hear, the gyms are crowded in January, right? So setting a fitness goal, maybe you want to lose some weight, or without realizing, underlying factor is you use food or screens or something to cope with stress at the end of the day. So in reality, like that's what you should focus on, right? That underlying thing. Same thing with like trying to wake up earlier without noticing that your evenings are driven by exhaustion and overstimulation.
I think that the big point when we're trying to set goals to overcome undesirable habits is understanding what job is that habit doing for you in your life, because that's going to be sort of essential to understanding, and you need to address that need before you can overcome that habit. And then similarly, when you're trying to create a new habit, create a goal for a new habit, like you said, fitness or whatever, whatever that is understanding, you have an outcome, but how do you want to feel when you're doing that goal? What do you want that goal to accomplish for you? And that can also affect time of day. Like with fitness, your energy level is different at different times of day. And if you want to replace doom scrolling with a hard workout, but that doom scrolling is like your calming, relaxing thing before you go to bed, that may not be the best sort of swap.
We all see it, and we probably all experienced it. You set these ambitious goals every New Year's Eve, in January. And then you lose that momentum when life gets busy or uncomfortable, or you're in those scenarios you're talking about where you're trying to replace the habits and it's not structured the right way to replace it with a better habit. So before to kind of, again, go listen to the self-awareness episodes. But a key thing here, I think, is before you ask what you need to do to change, ask who you need to be to sustain it. That shift really just begins with that self-awareness.
That's right. Goals fail when they fight your internal state instead of working with it. So capacity is built from within, and awareness is really the first brick. I think the second pillar of mental fitness, connection to others, and as mentioned before, we have other episodes that go into detail on what that means. But as it relates to goal setting, I think it's important to understand that humans don't change well in isolation. And ways to leverage this for goal setting is we tend to think of goals, most of us tend to think of goals as very personal, private, individual endeavors. Maybe we don't even want to share them with a spouse or a loved one. It's something you should be able to handle on your own. But that's really not the way we're wired. When we understand the way that we're social beings more than any other species on Earth, our nervous system regulates through other people, our motivation increases when we feel seen, and our follow-through improves when change happens in relationship and not in isolation. So a big one for me that I've leveraged in goal setting throughout my life is accountability. And I know that for some of us, this can be almost discouraging, but for me, it's very helpful to have someone who's really supportive and loving to help hold me accountable. And so I like to share my goals with my kids and my spouse, I'll tell you, nothing will keep you more accountable. Share a weight loss goal with your kids. If you want to be held accountable, every time you're trying to eat anything, they're like, Dad, it's not worth it. I mean, it's in a good way. There's such positive peer pressure, and I think that accountability can really serve in helping us stick with our goals.
Yeah, I think accountability is a really important point you bring up, Dave, because when we're talking about connection to others and like meaningful relationships, if you have those meaningful relationships, then I think when you think accountability, it's like you're not meeting your goal and there's some shame involved. Like, hey, dude, what are you doing? Like, you didn't meet your goal. But it truly is not like that. Accountability is not because someone's like watching you and tracking you, but it's because that connection with your kids, right, or your spouse or whoever those meaningful connections are actually can lower stress, right? That reduces that shame and helps you regulate your effort over time and keep you on track.
Trying to overhaul your habits alone and then quietly giving up when things get hard. These are sort of the ways that this sort of manifests itself in real life, or feeling embarrassed to admit that you're struggling with a goal. And so you just stop talking about it altogether. We all start January off or whatever period of time, new school year for teenagers or whatever, that we start off with momentum, but that momentum, the emotion of setting the goal fades and we fall to the level of our systems and our habits instead of rising to the level of our peak motivation. And so when we lose that, it just feels like everything's on our shoulders, and sharing that burden with others and having people to encourage us from time to time can just be so motivating and momentum building. And so starting strong, then slowly disengaging when things get hard, that's like the normal human experience. But when we can share that with others, then it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and again, a lot of people think they just need more discipline, and discipline's needed. We've said, discipline and willpower alone won't get goals. Discipline's surely needed, right? But there's often these connection gaps, right? And what oftentimes people need is more support, right? Connection can reduce that cognitive load, like you said, carrying it on your shoulders. You don't have to do that alone, right? So
yeah, and one of the things that Adam Clear talks about in the book Atomic Habits is when we're developing habits, which a lot of goals are about developing good habits or overcoming bad habits. But one of them is the final step is when we can make it part of our identity. That's when something becomes permanent and lasting. And one big way to do that is to be involved in a community or a group where the desired behavior, the goal you want to create, is the default behavior of that group. And for me personally, that was joining a swim club because I wanted to get better, in better shape and be a better swimmer. And so I joined a swim club of master swimmers, all who are elite swimmers, some of them former Olympians, some of them former college swimmers, all of them better swimmers than me. And basically the default behavior was they're swimming 5-6 days a week and they're in incredible shape. And by joining that and saying, I'm a member of this club, that became part of my identity, that positive peer pressure, that connection with the other members of my swim team, I swim harder when I'm at swim practice, like at least twice as far as I can possibly force myself to do when I go swim at the gym by myself.
That's a great example.
It's not even close.
Great example. It's funny you say that because I hear you talk about swim a lot in this swim group you're in. And most of the time I hear you talk about it, the benefits are the community and the belonging. Yeah. So that makes so much sense.
If you have access to a pool, you can swim on your own. But to have a coach who's telling you what the workout is and then swimming with peers and on your left and on your right in the neighboring lanes, it's easier. I feel more motivated and to do a workout twice as far as one I do by myself when I'm at a swim group. Anyway, that kind of thing. So that's just another example of how connection to others can be such a positive reinforcement in our goals.
Yeah, so maybe one practical shift or reflection on this, connect to others or making change or goals more relational. So instead of asking, how do I push myself harder? try asking, who do I need to stay connected to while I change these things?
Even with self-awareness and support, there's still one more piece that determines whether goals feel manageable or overwhelming, and that's your physical and mental capacity, which brings us to the third pillar of mental fitness, which is health and vitality.
No, this is a huge area, and I think many of us don't even realize this is a lagging area in our life, right? But what's funny is when you focus on it, it truly is probably the biggest capacity builder in your life, right? So sleep, nutrition, movement, they're not bonus points. They're not nice to haves. Like, these are prerequisites. You can't build consistent change without enough energy to support it.
When you're tired, your motivation wanes. It doesn't matter what it is. If you want to eat better, when you're tired, you eat worse. If you want to exercise more when you're tired, you don't exercise. If you want to be better mannered with a family member, when you're tired, you're more irritable. When you're tired, your ability to follow through and accomplish your goals is totally depleted. And so if you're lacking consistent sleep, or you're tired because of, poor nutrition, or whatever it is. Like, I love how you said that, Luke. These are prerequisites. They're not bonus points. Sleeping well, eating well, and regular movement is necessary for us to have the energy level to really accomplish virtually anything in our life. If you find yourself coming home from work every day just utterly exhausted, and then your motivation for the rest of the evening is just totally depleted, then you should really start looking at your health and vitality, sleep, nutrition, movement. And the ironic thing, I've always thought this is so interesting, is 30 minutes of movement, which you think tires you out, over time gives you more energy throughout the rest of the day than if you use those 30 minutes to be sedentary or restful.
Right.
It's just interesting how that works.
No, it's true. And it's arguable that this pillar's the most important, right? It can be argued because so many times, if you're trying to be more productive and you want to accomplish so much more, but you're already running on poor sleep, right? You're setting yourself up for failure, right? Or we've talked in previous episodes about how, like you said, simple movement increases all those feel-good chemicals in your brain, right? So if you're trying to improve your mood, just with like a self-help book or other things, without doing those necessary things to just alter your brain chemistry in a much easier way, like why not start with that?
And when we talk about sleep, we go into a lot of details on sleep, but even if your goal is to memorize something or to learn something, if you're a student, it's to get better grades, or if it's in your profession, it's to learn a new skill. Understanding how vital sleep is to learning, you would just know, why would I be even trying this without first addressing my sleep issues? Learning, when you learn during the day, it all goes from short-term to long-term memory during the sleep process. If you're sleep deprived, your ability to learn is diminished. I mean, it affects every area.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I said this pillar is most important, but sleep is probably the most important in this pillar, because if your sleep is broken, your goals are going to be an uphill battle, right? Yeah. By default.
And so, you mentioned this, but like what this looks like in real life is, so you're trying to set productivity goals, but you're running on poor sleep, or you're trying to improve, the way you treat other people, but you're just not moving at all. We kind of talk through all those things, but when we're neglecting our health and vitality, it's nearly impossible to make meaningful improvements and strides in other areas of our life. And so health and vitality are not side projects. They're really the foundation that makes everything possible.
To wrap up that part, is instead of asking, how do, I optimize my goals, try asking yourself, what would make this feel more manageable in my body, in my energy, in my vitality, right? So whether that's an earlier bedtime, like Dave said, a short daily walk, or eating regular meals, even something as simple as that, these small physical shifts often unlock big mental ones. So when you combine self-awareness, connection to others, health and vitality. Goals stop being something you try to force in your life, right? These are the foundations that become something you can actually sustain.
All right, this show is all about mental fitness. And here's something most of us don't admit. Everyone has those moments when you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure, and what's actually going on in your head. That's why we built New. New is a mental fitness platform designed to help you clear your thoughts, reflect, notice patterns, develop habits, and get support that fits who you are. It remembers your goals, your wins, the things you're working on, and helps you stay on track. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just real support when you need it. If you want to be part of the early access group, head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com. Sign up now and get 3 months free. Kind of moving to a whole sort of new topic is really why micro goals beats big goals. And let me explain what I mean by that. It's in other episodes we've talked about slow is faster, small is bigger, and that's very specific in terms of connection to self and self-awareness. But it's the way all of us work when big goals feel inspiring, which is awesome, and we should have big aspirations, but small behaviors is what actually works. And so we have to, at the end of the day, a big building is built with thousands of bricks or whatever the building pieces are, the lumber or whatever. And it all has to happen with small daily things. And if our goal is big without clear steps of the small, there's just no way to get there. That's kind of going back to why goals often fail, is when they're too big or too ambitious. And sometimes that can be remedied simply by breaking it down into the small daily behaviors of what we could do. So
the brick by brick thing is an interesting analogy, Dave, because a lot that's also, outcome goals versus basically what you're explaining is process goals, right? Where outcome goals are where you want to end up. Maybe that's, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds this year, right? Whereas process goals, like you're saying, are those bricks, things that you can actually do on a daily basis and build up over time, right? So your brain doesn't, act very well on outcomes or this thing 12 months away, but it can repeat these simple daily processes. And when people stall out, come February 14th, which the data says most people give up, it's usually because the goals live too far in the future to influence today's behavior.
I know that there's been even sort of in some of the books on, I think even in Atomic Habits, Adam Clear talks about this, but he kind of, in a way, sort of minimizes the value of goals. And there's been a little bit of that, of people talking about how goals are less important than the process. I think that honestly, goals are very important because goals set the direction of our mind of what we want to go towards, but we have to make sure that we have those broken down sufficiently to the processes and habits, that we have the process goals in place so that we can accomplish the big picture. Otherwise, we get caught up, you lose the vision. I mean, you have the big goal, but you get frustrated because you don't know how to get there. And you're focused on the outcome, and the outcome, it's like melting ice. If you have a block of ice that's, say, 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're trying to melt it, you can apply a lot of energy to that ice, and slowly that temperature raises from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and it gets up to 31 degrees. And on the outcome side, nothing has happened yet, because ice doesn't melt. Water doesn't melt until it's at 32 degrees or just above 32 degrees, the freezing temperature. And then all of a sudden it hits 32, 33 degrees, and the ice starts to melt. And it feels like it's all of a sudden. But if you're focused on the outcome, all of that work that goes in, it can feel discouraging and people give up because they're not seeing the outcome. But if you're focused on the process, you're just like, just keep going and it's going to happen. And then what seems to be all of a sudden we hit this point where the ice starts melting was actually a long process. But the outcome will happen if we focus on the process.
That's a great analogy. And I think with, focusing on the process, I think that's when you can start seeing some identity shifts, right? And you talked about identity a few minutes ago. Identity shifts are about who you are becoming through this consistent process, right? So when that behavior or new behavior with a goal is tied to identity, that consistency feels a lot more natural, right? It's not when it's tied to only outcomes. Motivation, like you said, fades. You're gonna be discouraged as soon as things get uncomfortable or they're not, working from where you think they should be.
Right, and I think a real common example, weight loss is probably the most common New Year's resolution in the United States. And when our goal is weight loss, it can be discouraging. But if our goal is process oriented, to walk for 15 minutes a day or to change the way we eat, then that's better. Well, for two reasons. One, weight is a very poor indication of improved health by itself. Two, we know the movement and the improved nutrition is going to improve our health, and that long-term it will result in weight loss. But sometimes it takes our body time to react. If we've been used to eating, we're not going to just lose weight right away. But when we start doing those things, it'll feel like the ice melting. We'll be exercising and eating right, and it might feel discouraging at first because the weight's not coming off, and then all of a sudden, it'll just start to happen. And it's very and then that's great. But if we're measuring the scale every single day, and that's our measure of success is what the scale reads, instead of whether or not we're doing the things that lead to improved health, then it can be very discouraging, especially because our body weight fluctuates. And so nothing can be more discouraging than after a day of really good exercise and really disciplined eating, and you get on the scale and you gained a pound. And so if you're focused on that outcome, you're just going to be dealing with the ups and downs of your natural body weight fluctuation that doesn't have anything to do with improved health.
Yeah, and this takes a little bit of a mindset shift, right? Because you said this earlier, big ambitious goals can feel inspiring. On New Year's Eve, the week leading up to it, you're thinking of these big goals, and it is inspiring to think of, this new form of yourself in 12 months. But these micro habits are not small because they lack ambition, right? This process focus isn't a lack of ambition. They're small because they're much more realistic for your brain to grab onto and actually accomplish, right? So that consistency is what builds that identity.
Yeah, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your habits. And so the micro habits is what the key is. Kind of shifting gears one more time, I guess a simple reframe exercise for our listeners. So the 3-question reset. So think about these. I'm going to ask 3 questions. I want you to just pause and think to yourself, what am I trying to change externally in my life? What might be happening internally that makes this change hard? And which mental fitness pillar needs strengthening first? Connection to self, connection to others, or health and vitality. So let me just repeat those. What am I trying to change? What's the goal? What's the outcome I'm looking for? And the next question is, what might be happening? What's happening internally that's causing resistance? Maybe it's just lack of physical energy. Maybe it's the lack of a support system around you. Maybe it's lack of self-awareness, whatever it is. So which mental fitness pillar needs strengthening first? And so from that, I'd pick one foundational habit, not a massive resolution. Start small. Small is bigger. Slow is faster. Start small. And the goal here isn't to do more, it's to do less, but more consistently.
Yeah, I love that. That's great reflection and encouragement. Instead of, chasing productivity and cramming everything in your day, maybe try focusing on going to bed, 30 minutes earlier most nights, or putting down your phone and, going to sleep earlier instead of trying to wake up at 4:30 a.m. and that exhaustion increases, right? Instead of, forcing motivation, just do some movement. Take a 10-minute walk every day, see what that does to those feel-good chemicals in your brain and what that does for motivation instead. So I love that. Pick one foundational habit out of one of these 3 pillars to focus on.
Right. Instead of committing to a full routine, like a full overhaul, which, is great. Everyone wants that every January. Most of us want that. But what we really need to sustain, instead of committing to some big routine, just choose the one habit that can be repeated even on hard days, even when we're tired, even when we feel unmotivated. Just that one small thing.
Yep. So to kind of, wrap this up a little bit, I love this quote that I saw. It says, success is not about forcing yourself into change. It is about becoming the person who can sustain it, which that's really mental fitness, right? That's what mental fitness is all about.
That's good. And I think I would say, just as we're wrapping up, and kind of wish I would have said this at the beginning, but I think one of the main reasons I've seen that people don't set goals, we talked about why people who do set goals fail, but I think even to address that, there's a lot of people who've given up on New Year's resolutions and goal setting. And they've given up because they've been unsuccessful in the past. And that's so discouraging. And like we talked about at the beginning, it feels like a reflection on our character and ourself. And so it's less painful to just not even set goals than to set goals and fail at accomplishing them. And that's really unfortunate, because if we can just sort of step back, and instead of giving up on the whole process, we can say, I was probably taking on too much or being too vague or didn't understand some of the things going on internally that were fighting my goals. But when we can, I really encourage you, if you've sort of given up on that goal-setting lifestyle, to reconsider and to really reflect on the things from this episode and think about what's happening inside. Why have I been unsuccessful in the past? And what's just one super small thing that I can do, that I can consistently and successfully do? And that can build such a momentum, right? Just less self-judgment, more curiosity about what's happening inside yourself, and just building a very simple foundation of one or two small things.
Yeah, I love that. So if you could take anything from this episode, let it be this. Before you set another goal, like Dave said, pause and look inward. Ask yourself what's actually happening beneath the behavior you're trying to change. Ask what your nervous system is asking for. Ask which part of your foundation needs strengthening first. Because when you build that awareness, when you build that regulation and support, this consistency becomes a lot more natural.
Yeah, mental fitness isn't about perfection or optimization. It's about sustainability. It's about small, repeatable practices that help you to stay connected to yourself, connected to others, and supported by your health and vitality over time. That's how real change sticks long term.
So, as you head into this new year, 2026, instead of asking, what do I want to achieve, try asking, what kind of foundation do I want to build in my life? Like Dave said, start small, stay curious, be kind to yourself. That's where the lasting change will begin.
That's awesome, Luke. Thanks. And thanks for spending time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, feel free to share it with your loved ones, with someone who you feel might need it or benefit from it. Subscribe, comment, promote, and we'll see you next time on the Mental Fitness Podcast.